Meeting of the Minnehaha Watershed District Board of Managers, September 12, 2024. All managers are present except Manager Hijmati. Are there members of the public here who wish to address the board on matters not on the agenda? No hands. May I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So move approval.
I'll take a motion for Manager Olson and a second for Manager Miller. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? On the consent agenda, we have approval of the August 22nd board meeting and approval of two resolutions. 24049 is authorization to release RFP for audit services, and resolution 24050 is the Citizens Advisory Committee member appointment adjustment. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Manager Sando moves. Is there a second?
Second.
Manager Maxwell. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? I do have one meeting to report on as for my contribution here. Last week, Mr. Whisker and Ms. Hoppy and I met with Commissioner Edelson. As you know, she's been in office since April, and she has been talking with all of her cities and as part of her orientation or her digging in. She's from Edina, so she was really enthusiastic about Arden and Weber both. Really loves those parks. And she requested to come back and do a walk and talk meeting, and we'll get into a climate framework. We were able to talk about a number of our policies and programs, but there's more to talk about, so there'll be another meeting with her. The upcoming meetings are on the agenda, including the CAC on the 18th, Manager Hijmati, and the Minnesota Watersheds Quarterly, October 15th, Manager Hijmati again, and that is an in-person meeting at Capital Region Watershed. We'll move now to item 10.1, which is permit 23-367, Ms. Sanis.
Good evening, President White and Board of Managers. Tonight I will be briefing you on permit 23-367 for a hydraulic dredging project in a previously dredged channel of Forest Lake. A group of 6 property owners who have riparian land on the channel, along with their contractor, Twin Cities Outdoor Services, propose to dredge the existing channel using the method of hydraulic dredging. The applicant requests an exception to Rule Section 5A of the dredging rule, which requires projects using hydraulic dredging to construct an earthen dike for spoil containment. Rather than use an earthen dike, the applicant proposes to use a geotextile container to serve the same purpose to contain dredge spoils. Staff and the district engineer have reviewed the permit and have evaluated the associated exception request and find that the applicant has provided sufficient evidence that the proposed project will achieve water resource outcomes at least equivalent with an earthen dike, and therefore recommend approval of the requested exception and the permit application with conditions. I will start off the presentation with the project background, followed by a walkthrough of the applicant's proposed methodology. I will then walk through the district's dredging rule analysis and the associated exception request, leaving time for questions and discussion at the end. The applicant is proposing to dredge an existing channel located on Forest Lake. The site is located in the Lake Minnetonka subwatershed in the city of Orono, as shown here in yellow. Zooming in further, you can see that the project site, which is circled in yellow, is a channel on the north side of Forest Lake. As you can see here, in 1957, there is no channel extending from the lake. And at some point between 1957 and 1964, a channel was dredged extending from the lake adjacent to the Wildhurst Trail properties. While it's somewhat difficult to see from the imagery, this was the channel in 1989. While a dredging permit was obtained from the Department of Natural Resources in 1989 and a district permit was applied for, there is no record that the district permit was ever issued, nor any evidence that dredging took place. Moving forward to the year 2000, you can see the channel still remains and there are multiple docks located within the channel. Finally, here is an image from 2024 showing the channel as it is today. Over the years, sediment has gradually moved back into the originally dredged area, making it difficult for boats to navigate and prompting the proposed dredging project. The 6 property owners of the parcels shown here in blue have jointly applied for the dredging application, along with their contractor, Twin Cities Outdoor Services. While the property owner who owns the selection of the channel highlighted in green here isn't applying for the dredging permit with the other co-applicants, they have expressed written consent of the project. Hydraulic dredging is a method of dredging that uses suction to remove sediment from the bed of a water body, compared to traditional dredging, which uses mechanical methods to physically excavate the sediment from the bed. Hydraulic dredging has been used for decades, but is becoming an increasingly more popular method due to the ability to remove finer sediment, have lower costs, and higher precision. The method is used across the United States and is used by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers along the Mississippi River. Our legal counsel also oversees the Rice Creek Watershed District, which uses hydraulic dredging for sediment removal for some of their own facilities as well. While the frequency of hydraulic dredging is rising, if approved, this project would be the first issued hydraulic dredging permit from the district. The method of hydraulic dredging proposed by the applicant uses a Dyno 6 barge, which is a lightweight hydraulic dredging machine which works from within the water. The machine uses a cutter head to excavate sediment, which is then pumped from the inlet into a tube that runs from the barge to the spoil containment bag on shore. This spoil containment bag is a large geotextile bag, and specifically a product known as EnviroTubes. As the bag fills, the filter fabric holds the sediment in while allowing the water to pass through. The entire bag is placed over a plastic liner that runs from under the bag to the lake, allowing the water to run back into the lake without picking up any sediment from the lawn. After dredging has stopped, the bags are left to dewater for 2 to 6 weeks until the sediment becomes a solid cake. At this point, the bags can be opened and the sediment is removed and hauled off-site. District staff and engineer also plan to coordinate with the applicant to conduct inspections during project setup, dredging, and the dewatering process. The channel is approximately 60 feet wide and 500 feet long. The applicant proposes to dredge the channel over about 50 feet of its width, as shown here in purple, and the 2 locations for the spoil containment bags are marked in red. I'd like to note as well that the aerial image that the figure is overlaid upon shows the extent of the dredging touching the cattails on that northern edge, but the applicant has stated that the cattails are not to be disturbed during the project, as the project is only within the existing channel. Here you can see that the applicant proposes to dredge a 15-foot wide section in the center of the channel to an elevation of 923.6 feet, between the blue markers shown in this figure. The bottom will then slope up to a bed elevation of 924.6 feet, where there are boat parking structures. These depths are consistent with the size and drafts of the watercraft that are moored in the channel, and additionally also in line with what was permitted in 1989 by the Department of Natural Resources. Forest Lake is also hydraulically and navigationally connected to Lake Minnetonka, so we've looked at the dredge depths relative to the joint policy agreement between the district, the Department of Natural Resources, and the Lake Minnetonka Conservation District. And the dredge depths proposed by the applicant align with the standards outlined in the agreement. Outside of the 15-foot center of the channel, the northern side would increase at a 3-to-1 slope, while the southern side would have a more gradual incline. Here you can see the existing cross-section of the channel in yellow and the proposed section in blue. The average current depth of the channel is 3.7 feet below the ordinary high water, and the applicant proposes to dredge so that the average depth is 5.8 feet. Now I'll outline the applicable rule analysis. According to the district's dredging rule, there are 2 scenarios under which private navigational dredging is permitted. The first is to maintain an existing channel to previously approved dimensions by the district. However, although the channel has been dredged previously, because no prior district approval exists, this project doesn't qualify under that provision. Instead, the project meets the second criteria, which is based on the riparian property owner's right to navigational access. District staff and engineer have evaluated the project under Section 3C to determine whether the navigational access the applicant seeks is reasonable. First, the ecological sensitivity of the area was evaluated. The navigational channel was created prior to the district's existence and has remained in use since that time for boat storage and travel to and from Forest Lake and Lake Minnetonka. It is likely that over time, lakebed material has moved to fill in the originally dredged area, and that navigational use in recent years has involved prop dredging, which suspends and redistributes the material incrementally during regular channel use. The current depth of the channel is 3.7 feet, and based on the size and draft of the boats in the channel, prop dredging is very likely to be occurring. Prop dredging can be harmful for benthic habitat by continually disturbing and resuspending sediment. Measuring against this continual potential impact, maintenance dredging is preferred from an ecological standpoint. There are a variety of watercraft currently being stored within the channel, which are generally about 20 feet long and have an average draft of 3 feet. The watercraft stored and used on Forest Lake are very similar to those stored and used on Lake Minnetonka, and there is substantial traffic between Forest Lake and Lake Minnetonka. The proposed scope of dredging is appropriate for the boats of this size and draft. The existing channel is approximately 60 feet wide and remains a relatively consistent width. The applicant does not propose to widen the entire channel, but proposes to dredge a 15-foot wide section in the center, which slopes up on both sides. The watercraft on this channel are of a size that typically navigate in Forest Lake and through the channel to the west arm of Lake Minnetonka, as shown here. This channel accommodates boats of the size and draft typically used on Lake Minnetonka, and thus further supports the proposed extent of dredging. The co-applicants currently have docks in the channel, and installing dock extensions rather than dredging would mean reducing navigational capacity for other users within the channel. Staff, along with the advice of district engineer, further assess the proposal against the criteria of Section 4 of the dredging rule. The channel has accumulated sediment since its original establishment, impeding navigational access and prompting the applicant's proposal for the project. Previously dredged channels naturally accumulate sediment over time through resettlement of existing sediment, as well as the accumulation of new sediment. When this occurs, if routine dredging isn't implemented, prop dredging will occur when boat traffic disturbs the shallow sediment. The applicant has compared the proposed hydraulic method with traditional dredging. Traditional dredging can lead to resuspension and disturbance of adjacent sediment within the water. Because spoils are not contained when removed, there is also a possibility of sediment to fall back into the water. In addition, the effluent from traditional dredging is not always monitored for water quality standards, whereas the applicant has provided a monitoring plan to avoid discharging spoil effluent that exceeds the state water quality standards. The applicant also compared the use of a geotextile bag to the required earthen dike, noting that earthen dikes typically require a larger area of upland disturbance and can be much more prone to erosion, while the geotextile bag requires no fill or excavation. District staff and the district engineer find that the proposed method, conducted per the protocol in the submittal, will have the least impact. Staff does not find there to be an external source of sediment other than ordinary runoff that contributes to low levels of sediment over time. The cause of sedimentation into the channel is resuspension and redistribution of bed material. This source is not within the applicant's control to prevent. Dredging must be limited to the minimum dimensions necessary to achieve the purpose. The applicant proposes to dredge to elevations and widths consistent with the size and drafts of the existing watercrafts on the channel, as well as the plans approved by the Department of Natural Resources in 1989. The applicant proposes a 3-to-1 slope on the northern side of the channel with a more gradual slope on the southern side. District staff and engineer find the more gradual slope to be of no concern, as the southern edge will likely be less susceptible to sediment sloughing as a result. The applicant proposes the dredging to occur in the fall of 2024 and not within fish spawning season. And while the applicant has not finalized the disposal site location for the dried and compacted soils, indicating the final spoil disposal location would be a condition for permit issuance, and the site must conform to district requirements. Staff, with the advice of district engineer, further assess the proposal against criteria of Section 5 of the dredging rule, which outlines additional standards for hydraulic dredging projects specifically. The applicant seeks an exception to Section A of the rule, which requires an earthen dike, and instead proposes the use of a geotextile bag for spoil containment. While the applicant has not provided a copy of the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency's spoil disposal permit or notification at this time, conformance to this section of the rule is recommended as a condition for permit issuance. The applicant plans to restore any disturbed areas through seeding, and the applicant proposes a monitoring plan in which the effluent will be measured daily when active dredging is occurring and weekly during the dewatering process to ensure compliance with the water quality standards As previously mentioned, the applicant is requesting an exception to Section 5A of the dredging rule, which requires the construction of an earthen dike for spoil containment. Instead, they propose using geotextile bags to contain and dewater the dredging spoils. Under the district's variance and exception rule, the Board of Managers may grant an exception if the alternative approach provides the same or better water resource outcomes as the rule standard. The applicant's alternative involves using geotextile bags to contain and dewater the dredged material, rather than constructing an earthen dike. These bags will receive the sediment via pump, and while the sediment is contained, water will filter back into the lake. The applicant's rationale for this proposal is the geotextile bags offer similar or better water quality outcomes than an earthen dike with minimal risk of rupture when handled appropriately. The geotextile bags also require much less land disturbance than an earthen dike, which by nature require large amounts of sediment to be brought on site and can be very prone to erosion. District staff and engineer have reviewed this exception request with a focus on spoil containment, risk of spoil leak, and water quality monitoring to evaluate if the proposed method can achieve equivalent water resource outcomes as those required under the dredging rule. The geotextile bag will fully contain the dredged material from the lake bed to the point of dewatering. This method limits the risk of sediment resuspension, which can occur with traditional dredging methods during transport or manual handling. By keeping the material contained throughout the process, the proposal reduces the potential for reintroducing disturbed sediment into the lake. The risk of spoil leakage was also evaluated. The bags are designed to withstand workers standing and walking on them as well as striking the bags during operation. They can withstand pressure greater than 100 times the typical pressure created during the dredging and dewatering process. The risk of rupture is further mitigated by the absence of heavy machinery near the bags until dewatering is complete. As an added precaution, the applicant will install 2 rows of silt fencing down gradient of the bags to capture any potential leaks. Finally, if all other noted precautions fail, while the water returning to the lake would be turbid, it's worth noting that it would be returning to its original source and not introducing any additional nutrients or sediment to the system. In accordance with Minnesota State Rule and in consultation with the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, water quality standards for turbidity, total phosphorus, and total suspended solids in the spoil effluent are exempt from regulation in cases where water is being returned to the same body of water for which it was dredged, as it is in this case. However, as a condition of the permit, the applicant would monitor water quality in line with the total suspended solids standard of 32 milligrams per liter for Lake Minnetonka. Daily monitoring using a handheld reader will take place during the initial 2 weeks of dredging and decrease to once a week once dredging is complete and the bags are dewatering. These results will be reported to the district to ensure compliance with the TSS standard. Should TSS levels exceed the allowable limit, the applicant will stop dredging operations and raise the plastic liner to prevent further effluent from dewatering. The applicant is also undergoing sediment analysis to choose an appropriate flocculant that could be added to the slurry in order to have sediment settle from the slurry at a faster rate. In closing, this permit has been found to meet all dredging rule requirements other than the requested exception of Section 5A. Staff and the district engineer have evaluated the exception request and find that the applicant has provided sufficient evidence that the proposed project will achieve water resource outcomes equivalent or greater to an earthen dike, with the meaning of Section 5A of the dredging rule. Therefore, staff recommend approval of the permit. Thank you, President White and the Board of Managers, for listening to this briefing and associated exception request for permit 23-367. If anyone has any questions or comments, I'm happy to address them now.
Thank you. Is there a motion to approve the exception?
So moved.
Manager Miller,
Second.
and second by Manager Olson. Questions regarding the exception? Manager Olson.
I've got several here. I'll go backward from what you just said to the earlier stuff. What flocculant would be used in case the water returning does exceed?
Yeah, the applicant is currently undergoing sediment analysis to determine exactly which flocculant would be best used for the specific sediment that is there. So
Okay.
they don't have a specific flocculant that they're planning to use at this point. They're still in the stage of determining which one would be best for this specific location.
Yes, because we use lots of different elements when we do our alum treatments and that kind of thing. Okay. All right. The second thing is, are those bags ever reused, or are they just a one-time?
I'm not sure. I might have to defer.
One time.
Actually, I do have a sample of.
Could you tell us your name, sir?
I'm Corey Trubenbach with Twin City Outdoor Services.
Thank you.
Okay. I noticed in your, I think it was your fourth slide where you showed the aerial view of the houses that have the riparian rights. Here you go. No, go back, go back. Advance. Keep going. Right there. The house that is not in the shadows, why are they not involved?
The one between 1003 and
Yes.
999.
Yes.
I believe they're not involved because their parcel boundary doesn't go up until the edge of the channel there.
So they don't have riparian rights?
Correct. That is my understanding, yes.
Okay. So if they were to dock a boat, they'd have to have a friendly neighbor that would allow them to put their boat
I believe so.
adjacent to their dock? Okay. I just wanted to make sure that there wasn't a individual who had a problem with this whole thing.
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
no.
Then on 4B, if dredging is removed, if dredging is to remove the sediment and was transported into the water body, and if the sediment source is readily identifiable within the applicant's control, the plan must remedy the cause of the sediment transport. Am I understand, this is more of a, maybe a legal question. Is this something where if 3 blocks away there's a pile of dirt and that dirt's what's eroding into their water area, are we, the homeowners or the contractor, responsible to go back and fix that other pile of dirt? Is that what I'm reading?
Mr. Smith?
Madam President, Manager Olson, I don't think so. In the situation you described, it would seem to be clearly distinguishable where the sediment's coming from. What we're talking about here is the source of sediment must be within the applicant's control, and it doesn't sound to me from your example that it would be.
Okay, I understand that this is not an issue here, okay? But when is it an issue? Do you have an example of when I, as a contractor, would have to go and mitigate that source of problem, that transport issue?
Well, I'm thinking of examples where there's silting in of channels,
Okay,
and there's known erosion causes that the same property owner is able to manage. And that would be a situation in which coming to request a dredge when in fact you could do something else to remedy the source of the sediment, silting in, is what is envisioned there.
Got it.
So it's a part of the philosophy of a minimal impact. We want dredging to be really the minimal impact solution.
okay, so if my property every day is causing damage to the channel because of what I'm doing, and I could stop the problem by doing something on land.
Addressing erosion, for example.
Got it. Okay, thank you. That helped understand what that meant. Appreciate it.
Oh, go ahead,
Yes.
go ahead, Lisa, go ahead. Ask yours first.
No, I'm done.
Oh, I thought John, a couple of quick ones. Is there an estimate of how many pounds or how many bags we're gonna have taken out of there?
Yes, yeah, so the estimate is around 1,500 cubic yards of material spread over the 2 bags, one at the end of the channel and one on the southern side of the mouth of the channel.
Okay, then I didn't see a time frame for when that has to be removed once the bags dry out and everything else. Is there, or they just stay there forever until, or is there a time that they have to be out
Yes.
in a year or 6 months or before they would start breaking up and going back into the lake?
So the typical dewatering process can be anywhere from 2 to 6 weeks, depending on how fast it takes for the water to completely leave and have it be a solid. And then once the dewatering process has happened, that's when they break out the bags and remove the sediment to haul it off-site. And there's incentive to get it off-site, just as the property owners don't want a large
That's what I
bag
was
of
wondering, if there was,
spoils.
or if you just, but last winter I can't get out there, or spring now I can't get out there, is there a time frame that it has to be removed?
Not that I know of a specific time frame where it has to be removed from, but that's typically the time frame that it occurs.
I have a thought about 1989. It was a drought year, and I don't think you could get into Forest Lake. I think the channel was not navigable. many of them weren't, they were so low. Anyway, it was a drought year. Not a lot of water. Manager Olson?
One more question. I finally found. On item 4F, the 3 different locations of where that material would go, is that based on if there's a problem in the material? In other words, if I find mercury, I go to this place. If I find ammonia, I go to that place. Is that the kind of
Yes, so there's,
decision that's going to be made?
yes, so the applicant is still, exactly what you're saying is, depending on if there is contaminants, then it would need to go to a waste treatment facility where it can't just be, like hauled off just anywhere. So the applicant is, there's kind of a decision tree where if it's contaminated, they have a couple of options for contaminated spoils, and then if it's not contaminated, they also have a couple of different options they're pursuing, or if it's not contaminated.
Okay.
And all those sites, all that is subject to MPCA permits?
Yes, correct. So MPCA will, and that sediment analysis will determine if
Okay.
it's contaminated or not.
Manager Loftus?
I had a question on the side slopes.
Mhm.
Is that something we regulate? Is that something, it's in your rule analysis, but I wasn't sure what the rule is and,
Yes, yeah. So the rule is that the side slope should be 3-to-1, or if the site presents that a different slope is reasonable, then that can be taken into account as well. So in the case of this project, the northern slope is 3-to-1, and then the southern slope is slightly more gradual because of the boats and that are being moored there. And when we evaluated that southern slope, which is a little bit more gradual, the gradual slope actually tends to have less sediment sloughing just because there's not that steep of a drop off, so it was no concern to the district.
in your cross section, when you had your cross section slide up, if you pull that up a sec, you focused on a 15-foot wide channel. I don't know that it is impactful, but out of curiosity, why are those side slopes not part of the calculation or part of what's considered to be dredged? Because you're
Yes,
clearing quite a bit of
Mhm.
material out of those side
Yeah.
slopes, aren't you? Or
Yeah.
maybe it doesn't, maybe it's not a concern with our rule analysis, but,
No, that's a good question. So the 15 feet is just for the deepest level, and it's
Yeah.
still, the full footprint is definitely still taken into account when evaluating the impacts. But for this section, the footprint, while it's a little wider on the south side because it is more gradual than that 3-to-1 slope, it's also to accommodate the dredging up until where the boat landings are and the individual
Yeah.
docking, and then go up a little bit further.
I understand they want to get their boats in on that side, and the other side, it's not necessary.
Correct.
And maybe that's not impactful, other than our side slope rules are being met, and therefore it's fine. I just was curious how that, making sure that, was that part of the calculation? I mean, that is definitely being dredged as well.
Yes,
It's
yes,
not just the 15-foot strip
correct.
for 50 feet.
Yes, so it's 15 feet at the widest depth, but it's about 50 feet at the entire footprint.
Okay, so it'd be 50 by 50
Yeah, or 50
impact.
by, yes, I believe it's by about 500 for the total length
Oh,
of the
500,
channel.
sorry.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, so 50 by 500.
Let me recognize Mr. Meehan here.
Manager Loftus, managers, how they calculated their volume is that whole entire cross-section. The 15-foot is just the regulation around the navigable channel that they have access to. So they start with the main access is 15 feet and then dredge out from there. So all the soils that you're, the 1,500 cubic yards, that's including those side slopes as well.
Okay.
That's incorporated to that. And then, again, all of that material is contained within the bags until they're dewatered, and then they move it off-site.
Okay, so it's part of the calculation. It's obviously staff and legal and the contractor and the homeowners have all done a lot of homework, which I appreciate. And I think what we're being asked for is, like you said, evidence that this will work. And it sounded like in your introduction, it's been used for decades, is what you said, but not here in the watershed district, but it has in the state and in throughout the U.S. Curious if the contractor provided any past project experience that you were able to look at to where they've used this technique and what the results were?
Yeah, that is a good question.
In
I'll
a
have to
similar
defer-
style?
Yeah, I'll have to defer to the
environment?
contractor, but I also do want to note that it has been used within the district in the city of Orono as well.
Oh, okay.
But just for stormwater facilities that we do not regulate, so.
Got it.
Yeah, it's used in the metro as well.
So
but
there's
I'd
some
like-
project experience you can look at and some results you can
Yes,
look at.
yep. And the Rice Creek Watershed District also uses it for some of their own facilities as well for maintenance,
Okay,
maintenance dredging.
okay.
Yeah. I don't know if you've used it for other projects in the metro.
So the question is about that company's experience using this.
Yeah, or just generally, since it's, a new exception for us, and relying on the results or evidence of belief that it's gonna work out. It sounds like you've done a lot of homework, but just,
So
it's nice to have real-life examples of what you've worked with.
So again, I'm Corey Trubenbach with Twin City Outdoor Services. How we got to this process, so we haven't used this machine yet ourselves. We got to this process looking at a project in a stormwater basin at Best Buy Corporate in Richfield. On the south side of the building, they have a sediment pond that's about an acre, a little over an acre. There's no access for an excavator, there's no way to really get in there, and I started looking for a solution for them. Tried to find a hydraulic dredging company to come up and do that project for them. I could not find one in Minnesota. So then by the time you pay the travel out. So we looked at this, and I'm talking with, because our main business is snow plowing for 30 years. So it's like Medtronics and Best Buys and tenants and like big corporate campuses. So we're looking for a solution for their sediment ponds too. This seemed to be the lowest impact way to get into these facilities where you don't bring an excavator, you don't, tear up land, you don't have to remove the docks and you have to remove the boat lifts, but not the docks and the boathouses, and we don't destroy their landscape. So it's that's why we're here. We do have the support of our manufacturer. Actually, the gentleman that's going to come up and work with us is a second generation dredger. His dad is the one that invented or put together this machine. He's 93 years old. He's still on the road, still answering questions, and he's like the guru that we can call and talk to. The machine is very simple. It's a 65 horse diesel motor. It's a hydraulic pump. There's 3 hydraulic circuits. There's 4 gauges, and that's it. I mean, it's a really simple machine. So we don't have the personal experience yet, but I'm very confident that with their resources and the amount of research and time and energy we put into it, this will be a successful project.
But you haven't done the Best Buy project yet.
No, but
Okay.
we are going to do one the 23rd here in the stormwater setup.
But the manufacturer you were using has done a lot of this.
Many. This comes, the technology and kind of the setup comes out of the Mississippi Delta down by Baton Rouge and New Orleans and that, so.
All right, well, everyone's done their homework. I was just curious what we're falling back on, so thank you.
I
Appreciate it.
recognize, Manager Olson and then Manager Miller.
There are 2 things that Manager Loftus brought up that triggered a question. And one of them is the reason we've never approved hydraulic dredging before, and that is when one applicant, probably 12 years ago, showed us it in operation, he had a great big boom out the side of the barge shooting the effluent into the wetland adjacent to the channel. And that wasn't acceptable at all in the state of
I
Minnesota.
can see why there's an aversion to that.
Okay, so that's where we're coming from, and
Okay.
the second thing is, could you go back to the historic aerial photo before 80? Right. Okay, go one back, come back, more modern.
More modern.
Right there. At the northwest end of the channel, they've changed the shoreline with looks like a slot right there for a boat. That's a big no-no on the lake today. Is that, I saw that that cutout is still there. Is that sheet piling still? Or is that just a shape of the shoreline now?
I believe it's all just rip-wrapped and natural along that southern kind of western edge there.
Okay,
at this
so
point.
you don't have sheet piling in
I don't
any other
think so,
properties?
no.
Okay, that was my last question when she talked about slope.
Thank you. Manager Miller.
First of all, great presentation, total understanding of what's proposed here. And I always get nervous about these dredging applications because you got the needs and wants of the applicant, and then you got the other people on the lake that may be negatively impacted by it, and then we got the preservation of the resources, and I think you've answered all those questions really adequately, that I feel real comfortable supporting your recommendation.
Thank you, Manager Miller.
Anything
Agreed.
else before we vote? Those in favor? Oh, Mr.
Louis.
Smith?
Madam President, I just want to note, just maybe for the minutes and the historical record, that in my memory, which now goes back almost 40 years, the district has approved hydraulic dredging projects, but it wasn't this method. It was on-land disposal with a earthen dike and the settling, and it wasn't an ideal process. But my recollection is that it's been done and approved in the Lake Minnetonka area historically, but probably not, in the last 25 years,
Thank you.
just so we know.
In my opinion, legal and staff have done a good job. There's a lot of safeguards if
Yeah.
something doesn't go as planned, so I appreciate that.
Backstops.
Yep.
Ready to vote? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Then let's move to approving the permit with the exceptions and the conditions stated in the permit report. Is there a motion to approve the permit?
So moved.
Manager Olson, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Maxwell. Any further discussion? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you.
Thank you.
Great job.
Now we'll move to the highlight of the evening, which is adoption of the budget and certification of the levy. Mr. Whisker.
All right, thank you, President White, Board of Managers. As President White just mentioned, tonight represents the culmination of, and a statutory milestone, I suppose, of the 2025 budget development process, which to date's included a series of committee meetings with the board that began in May, included review by the Citizens Advisory Committee, where we got great feedback and dialogue from our CAC members and participation from Treasurer Loftus, and then the public hearing that we had on August 22nd. So we have two resolutions that are in your packet, 24-051 and 24-052. We'll handle those separately through roll call vote. 24-051 would have the board adopting a 2025 budget of $14,420,445 and announcing the November 21st truth in taxation comment period. So there'll be another chance for public comment, and we'll continue refining the budget between now and then. And then 24-052 would certify the levy to Hennepin County of $9,869,513.
And that represents what percent increase?
It's a flat increase, Manager Miller, from last year, so 0% increase. We've talked about that through the public hearing. Throughout the budget development process, we've seen a 2% increase 1 year out of the last 6. So I would recommend that the board consider those resolutions for
Thank you.
adoption this evening.
Is there a motion to adopt Resolution 24-051, which is the budget?
So moved.
Manager Miller, is there a second?
Sando.
Manager Olson?
No, I was going to say, that was Manager Sando.
I'm sorry, Manager Sando.
I never make a motion to approve budgets.
Manager, is it motion by Manager Sando, second by Manager Olson? I'm totally mixed up now.
Thank you.
Somebody knows, right?
Yes.
Sando moved, and I said, I should have said point of order. So we have a motion only right now.
May
I'll
I have a
second it.
Thank you, Manager Loftus.
Happy to second it. It's a great budget.
Any questions or comments before we vote? We have, of course, as you said, followed this through iterations and refinements through the year, so it's very familiar to us. Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Oh, I'm sorry, roll call, right?
Yes.
Manager Maxwell.
Aye.
Manager Olson.
Aye.
Manager Miller.
Aye.
Manager Sando.
Aye.
Manager Loftus.
Aye.
Manager White, aye. Then, Resolution 24052 is certification of the tax levy. Is there a motion to approve, to adopt the resolution?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second? Is there a second?
Second. I was seeing if Mr. Miller would
Oh, I see.
approve a budget.
You're invading them, yeah.
Is this just I always like it when the treasurer is able to participate in the
Yes.
money.
I'm happy to participate in this.
Thank you.
Any discussion or question or comments? Those in favor say, beg your pardon, do it again. Roll call. Manager Maxwell.
Aye.
Olson.
Aye.
Miller.
Aye.
Sando.
Aye.
Loftus.
Aye.
White, aye. We've approved.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
On to a new year. Just in time to start an audit.
No, it's-
That's right. Next on the agenda then is 12.1, which is 325 Lake Road Restoration and Redevelopment. Mr.
Do you
Hayden.
want to handle the administrator's report now or after closed session? At your pleasure.
Let's do it now.
Okay.
Sorry, Mike, I'll
Still join you.
defer there.
He doesn't want to.
Yeah, just a four bullet update for this evening. Water levels, we're rounding out the year. We've had consistent warm and dry weather since about mid-August. We did have a couple of storms, but they were short-lived, even though they did see a water level jump. Since then, we've seen consistent drop in water levels. So right now, Minnetonka is actually below the ordinary high water. It's at 929.12. The creek down at the Hiawatha gauge is at 111 CFS, so the lowest it's been since, on both fronts since early spring. Accordingly, we've adjusted Grays Bay Dam discharge to 50 cubic feet per second. So we have, we're maintaining base flow out of the dam to provide base flow to the creek, and the lake's going to continue to be slowly drawn down towards 928.6 as we prepare for later this year ice in. So not too far around the corner there. The second thing I want to report on, the board's asked that we keep you apprised of conferences, presentations that we're attending, or presentations that we're giving. I think we might be presenting at Water Resources Conference coming up. Brian's got a presentation there. We submitted to Minnesota Watersheds for their annual conference on a couple fronts. We'll see if we get selected. And most recently, I was invited and honored to participate in the Minnesota Stormwater Seminar. It was hosted by the St. Anthony Falls Lab, and I get to present alongside Chris Close, the Director of Water Permits for the EPA, Seth Brown, the Executive Director for the National Stormwater Alliance, and Nicole Blazing. She's the Director of the Municipal Division for the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. And then Randy Niepresh, who is the person that works with the Minnesota Cities Stormwater Coalition. So a municipal perspective at a national and state level, and then agency perspective at federal and state level. It's pretty well attended from what I heard. They did a little bit of a breakdown of participants, which I don't have in front of me, but they had 500 registrants, most online, about 75 in the audience, so some pretty good exposure for us. Broad-ranging discussion, including some pretty hefty emphasis on contaminants of emerging concern, which, while slightly outside of our bailiwick, but quite a big discussion on PFAS, how that's ubiquitous in the environment, and where the federal agencies are going with regards to monitoring and potentially regulation long-term. And then a lot of the other questions kind of fell more squarely within work that we're actively working on. We had some great discussion around climate action and the pressures that are going to be on municipal storm sewers as we see volatility in rainfall patterns. We got to discuss some of the challenges in interdisciplinary watershed management between the city scale, watershed scale, across sectors, public and private, and then from local all the way up to federal. So I get to talk a lot about collaboration across silos, across sectors, levels, and some of the challenges that come along with that and how we've made that our business model. We also got to talk a little bit again about climate action, climate change, and how we're seeing on the front edge of these changes in rainfall patterns, cities begin to take action, whether it's the Morningside project, some of the work that we're seeing Minneapolis do, and that cities are working primarily right now on the things that they have the most control over, the conveyance systems, the stormwater systems, and that we're really going to be pushing as we move towards our 2027 plan for integrated planning and land use solutions, because it's the land that's filled the wetlands and taken the storage that we used to have naturally. And there ended up being good discussion around that, and we had some friends in the audience from both Edina and Minneapolis that gave a chuckle because they're active participants in some of that upstream, downstream tension that we're seeing about climate-based water management over the last year or two. And then the last thing that I wanted to update the board on is we do have some staffing updates. We've made 3 new hires that started within the last week. I'd keyed the board into those hires previously, but everybody's now arrived. So we have James O'Brien, our outreach coordinator, Andrew Stevenson, new permitting manager, and Eva Bachmeister, who's our water resource scientist in research and monitoring. They'll all be at the September meeting as a COCORT, ready to introduce themselves, so dust off your bios and be prepared for some icebreakers. We thought we would do it later in September so they can tell you everything that they've accomplished since they've only been on the job 3 days and not everybody can make it. So we've been having a lot of fun with onboarding. We're making good use of Lewis's historic insights and principles. We've kind of batched that out into Watershed 101 and governance and where we've been over 50 years and the different thematic schemes for each of those decades and how that's brought us to a balanced urban ecology philosophy of watershed management. Next, we're going to be tackling the 2 key strategic priorities of capital projects and our climate policy in a couple of sessions, and then round it out with our culture. So they'll be here at September 26th to introduce themselves. We're really, really excited. I think the board's been incredibly supportive of the approach that we've been taking to culture and slowly and methodically building out our team. So it's nice to have an energized and aligned cohort joining us ready to crush some work. And with that, that's the, whatever date it is, the 12th administrator's report, if you get questions.
Any, Sandra?
Can I have just a short report?
Yeah.
Yeah, positive short report. This past week, I was out to the County Road 6 project and had to ask directions twice. One gentleman lives on Long Lake, and the compliments back, I introduced myself and had my papers in my hand for the map and so forth, and very complimentary about our staff and Becky and the whole operation. Second gentleman was trimming his trees, came down the driveway to greet me, and was right almost on top of the project. He was very complimentary as well. So it's a kudos to the staff when they go out. They have 2 people. A lot of times you hear the complaints, no complaints. So positive outcome.
It's a great report back. We should have had you bring the draft easement. You could have just gotten it.
I suppose it wouldn't be appropriate to bring the complaints to your attention about the staff.
I think that's appropriate,
There's not.
as long as they're not about me.
Then let me also just jump to item 13. Are there board inquiries, issues, or ideas to submit this evening? Then we'll go to item 12. Thank you.
Wonderful. I think I'm going to hang out up here with Mike for this closed session.
Thank you, everybody.
Good evening, Madam Chair and managers. We're going to provide a little bit of a redevelopment planning update for the Board of Managers in advance of our forthcoming partnership planning work session that we have scheduled with the City of Hopkins liaisons and Alatus in the coming week. The timing of tonight's update is also critical as it relates to the Third Amendment to the purchase and sale agreement, which requires a closing of that Phase 1B property by November 1st, 2024. So as the board knows, we've been working with the City of Hopkins for nearly a decade to really envision opportunities that the 325 Blake Road site provides as both a local and regional amenity, and have been working jointly with Hopkins and Alatus for the better part of 4 years, specifically on integrating and delivering this site. The development envelope and the vision of the developer and the city have experienced some challenges over the last year and a half, including solving for some of the site infrastructure, some of the parking needs, and securing capital to move the project forward. So following that 120-day extension that we unilaterally provided Alatus on July 1st, we're approaching that November 1st deadline, which is really a critical deadline for coming up with decisions for advancing the project. So this evening, I do want to provide a brief recap on the history of the site and its importance within the Greenway, reground the board in the present development efforts, the developers working to still capitalize the site and what we've heard recently. And then if it serves the pleasure of the board, we can advance into closed session to discuss ongoing negotiations around the site in advance of that forthcoming joint work session that we have this coming week. So we acquired the 325 Blake Road property to not only treat significant amounts of regional stormwater and restore Minnehaha Creek, but also to provide access to the Greenway and green space that surrounds the area. The site isn't only a keystone project in the heart of the Minnehaha Creek Greenway, which connects all upstream and downstream efforts to date, but is really the epitome of balanced urban ecology. We've talked about this often in that Blake Road corridor in particular was identified as an area in need of transformation and a critical area of social and economic transformation, in particular in their small area plan, and that the efforts of the district could really catalyze that opportunity through restoration of the natural spaces, delivery of regional stormwater, and ultimately the delivery of a transit-oriented development on the site adjacent to the to the Blake Road station area on the Southwest Light Rail. So we've been focused in this area of the Greenway between 169 and 100 for the better part of a decade, investing in a variety of projects both upstream and downstream of the 325 Blake Road site. Because it identified this area as having the highest pollutant load per unit area of anywhere along the nearly 23-mile stretch of Minnehaha Creek, the 325 Blake Road site, being the former approximately 17-acre industrial site, was purchased by the district in 2011, and we've rerouted about 260 acres. So all of the light blue area and the area in orange have now been rerouted to the site for delivery, and when finished could deliver up to about a 400-pound reduction in nutrient loading to Minnehaha Creek and downstream Lake Hiawatha, which in context is approximately the equivalent of the waste load allocation for the entire city of Minneapolis to Lake Hiawatha. And this work is also going to include the Greenway connections to our upstream project areas such as Cottageville Park, as well as to the Cedar Lake Regional Trail, and ultimately downstream to the Minnehaha Preserve and Methodist Hospital. So since 2021, when the city and watershed district selected Alatus, we've been working through some of the challenges that are associated with trying to deliver a project of this magnitude. And the board will recall that when Alatus was selected, we did voice some concerns over the development total development cost, I should note. The board noted that Alatus was the most visionary proposal that we received, but there were some concerns with the project being proposed for delivery on the site. And so because of that, the partners identified Wellington as a secondary developer, and then grounded the agreement with some conditions, which included things such as the purchase price being fixed and could not be used as subsidy to make up for other gap financing, and that was supported by the city. That the city wouldn't look to the district to assume any further financial risk, and that they would accept the risk associated with the potential financial gaps on the site, whether that was through TIF, grants, or other subsidy. That operations and maintenance responsibilities would be shared by the partners, with the districts focused on the natural space and the water management on the site, and also that the joint liaison group would remain committed to working together to solve for that. So following the selection of Alatus, we did host a design shred in 2021, July of 21, to develop the master plan, which then became the basis for the negotiations around the purchase and sale agreement, as well as the planned unit development and other development agreements with the city of Hopkins. And so the vision of the partners through that design shred was really this fully integrated site that achieved the goals of all the partners, including some of our agency partners at the county, Metropolitan Council, and others. And since that time, the district has fully completed its design, and the first phase of development is complete, so the northernmost portion, that affordable housing on the north side of the site. a little bit of a closer look at our public realm area and the elements that we have designed. It includes the central stormwater feature, as well as some of the other nodes with the landing and cottageable parcels and connections to the big Cedar Lake Regional Trail. Due to the integration of the design, all of our work requires the city and Lattice to deliver the development and move in order for us to move our effort forward. Right now, despite our work being fully designed and fully funded, we are at a little bit of a standstill at the moment as we try to solve for that challenge. So in terms of where we've been with the Lattice in delivering the development since 2021, some of the major mile markers include the purchase and sale agreement being executed in May of 2022. That included the feasibility period, which is the due diligence period for the developer, and an ability for them to extend unilaterally over 2 separate 90-day timeframes for a $25,000 fee each. There have also been 3 amendments to the PSA. The first was in June of 2022, which was to allow for them to acquire the Building A site and also provide an additional $1 million in earnest money to the district. The second was November of 2023, which extended that feasibility period out to March 31st of 2024, so they could work to secure additional bonding through the city. It identified secondary developers such as Artesa and Ron Clark as subsidiaries to the purchase agreement, and then allowed them some additional time to seek capital financing. And that was actually approved with the $100,000 extension being funded through the $1 million in escrow to be refunded at the time of close. And then the third, as the board will recall, was just in July of 2024, which moved that closing date 120 days to allow for alternative developer discussions. This was a amendment that was unilaterally provided by the district to avoid termination at the time of the contract due to the feasibility period terminating on March 31st. Or on June 1st from that March 31st trigger. Leading up to that decision, we hadn't heard anything from Lattice or the city as it related to what the desire was, so the board opted to continue to support the partnership while we explored those options. So just briefly turning back to the site plan, we're hoping that we've done a little bit of an animation that can help break down what we're looking at as it relates to this site. We can step through how both the challenges of Lattice to secure some of their private equity and the public finance scheme for the city has impacted the district's ability with its project and ability to move that public realm forward. So as you'll recall, based on the availability of public subsidy early on after we'd executed the purchase and sale agreement, Lattice and the city encouraged the district to amend the PSA and help deliver that affordable component of Building A. We sold the building pad to Lattice for $1 million. And then to maintain forward momentum with the partnership, requested and Lattice committed $1 million in hard earnest money at that time. That money is in escrow, as we noted. Some of it was drawn on for the one extension to be reimbursed. But if they failed to meet any of the conditions on the site, that would result in termination. That money does become the district, such as reciprocal easements, proof of financing, those sorts of things. The Phase 1B portion then, during the second amendment to the purchase and sale agreement, shifted which parcels or which building pads became part of Phase 1B. It includes the townhomes, the senior cooperative, the Building D apartments, and then that commercial space, as well as the main site infrastructure through the heart of the site. And then Phase 2 is the 15-story mid-rise tower on the southwest portion of the site. Within the amended purchase and sale agreement, the district agreed to close directly with Ron Clark on the townhomes. They have committed $2 million to that through their letter of intent or agreement with Lattice. And at the same time, also the district also agreed to close directly with Artesa during that closing period for the senior cooperative, again for $2 million, and they have their agreements with Lattice. So Lattice is then responsible for the remaining portion of the site to meet that purchase price, which falls across buildings C, D, and E. That would be that $6.25 million with $1 million sitting in escrow at the moment. One of the biggest challenges is that to support the site infrastructure of this road, Hopkins has committed to issuing bonds. Those bonds will be assessed against buildings C and D, so the mid-rise and then the building closest to the stormwater facility, which, given the scope of and vision of building C in particular, its market viability and some concerns from the equity partners, about absorption, Alatus has been struggling to capitalize that building at this time, which means that without that direct bond and subsidy for the road construction, there wouldn't be any roads or infrastructure through the site. And without roads and infrastructure through the site, the rest of the development cannot proceed because there aren't access points to their building pads. Without the development, Alatus, of course, can't build the hard edge wall, and so the district cannot start to construct its regional stormwater facility. So with the district's project fully funded and ready to go, and with $2 million in Public Facilities Authority funding secured as pass-through to Alatus for all of their stormwater components, the cascade, and part of that hard edge wall, we have specifically been asking, in particular through our recent liaison meeting, for Alatus and Hopkins to solve for the site infrastructure and find a creative way for the district to begin to advance its project forward, rather than simply waiting for the private equity market to fall into place for that mid-rise tower in particular. And so with approximately 45 days remaining on the closing date extension that was provided through that third amendment, the partners have continued conversations around that very thing, including our recent liaison meeting with Councilmember Hunke and Mayor Hanlon, and agreed that a work session amongst the partners, including Alatus, would be a sound step forward. So we are beginning to plan for that, and that session, or that work session, will be hosted by the district next Wednesday, September 18th. And we'll be continuing conversations around creativity to help deliver this site. So at this time, the board may consider entering into closed session to discuss the ongoing negotiations surrounding the potential sale and the forthcoming termination of the contract in 45 days. And if that is the desire of the board, I know that Lewis Smith can lead you on that transition.
Thank you. Would you state the reason for the closed session, Mr. Smith?
Madam President, the reason is to consider the terms and conditions of the purchase and sale agreement for 325 Lake Road in Hopkins.
Thank you. Is there a motion to go into closed session?
So moved.
Manager Maxwell, second.
Second.
Manager Loftus, seconds. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, we are in closed session. Okay, so we can go back into open session?
Hopkins and.
Is there a motion to go back into open session?
Absolutely.
I don't know.
I would
about
take
it.
that.
Yeah, talk
Okay.
to Jean about that. I have no clue
Those in
about
favor say
the
aye.
characters.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. The meeting is adjourned.